Some Singaporean viewers keep shouting, "Stop comparing countries." But really, if you don't like it, just look away. With over 100 million new videos uploaded to YouTube every single day, you're not exactly short on choice. Scroll, swipe, binge your K-dramas. Problem solved. And this, mind you, in Singapore, a nation that prides itself on producing child prodigies who juggle GRE vocabulary like confetti and slip between Mandarin, Tamil, Malay, and English as if they were Netflix subtitles. Yet curiously, after 12 long years of English classes, Japan's so-called genius students emerge with a vocabulary smaller than a TikTok caption, around 2,000 words, and many still can't even ask where the bathroom is. IQ 109, allegedly, on paper, dazzling. In practice, let's just say the difference between Singapore's linguistic pride and Japan's polite confusion is sometimes thinner than advertised. Now, here's the part Americans might want to sit down for. They call Singapore a village. Yes, a village. As if skyscrapers sprouted overnight just to impress visiting bankers and TikTok influencers. But the reality will shock you. This so-called village has cleaner streets than Manhattan, faster Wi-Fi than Silicon Valley, and a housing policy that makes Los Angeles look like a failed urban experiment. I feel, from experience, that when foreigners dismiss Singapore as some small tropical outpost, it's because they've never actually lived there. They've only stopped over at Changi, Instagrammed the Jewel waterfall, and then flown straight to Bali. They don't see the system, the discipline, the ambition humming underneath. And trust me, once you peel back the layers, Singapore isn't a village. It's the quiet overachiever in the classroom, the one Americans laugh at, right up until they realize she's already bought the entire group project. So buckle up, because in the next few chapters, I'm going to show you exactly why calling Singapore a village is not only wrong, it's hilarious. Let's start with the obvious. Americans have a geography problem. I feel, from experience, that the average American could find Hogwarts on a map faster than they could point to Singapore. And when they do finally find it, their reaction is usually, "Wait, that tiny dot, that's a country. Isn't that just like a village?" Now, to be fair, I get it. When you grow up in a land where driving 6 hours still leaves you inside Texas, the idea that an entire sovereign nation could be smaller than Disney World feels absurd. To Americans, size equals legitimacy. A place isn't real until it takes a full day's drive to cross. So Singapore, with its neatly trimmed borders and a landmass you could lap in an afternoon, must be a village, right? But here's the punchline. Those same Americans who laugh at Singapore's size are often the ones drowning in crumbling infrastructure. I mean, have you seen the state of New York's subway compared to Singapore's MRT? One feels like a futuristic portal with spotless platforms and digital signs. The other, like a dungeon level in a video game, rats included, no respawn point. And don't even get me started on the housing situation. Americans think Singaporeans live in jungle huts because of size. Meanwhile, over 80% of Singapore's population lives in well-maintained, air-conditioned public housing with elevators that actually work. Compare that to Los Angeles, where half the city seems to be living in tents on the sidewalk, waiting for the American dream to wake them up. I feel from experience that Americans use village not as a description, but as a coping mechanism. It's easier to dismiss Singapore's efficiency as cute than to admit that a tiny dot on the map might be running circles around the supposed land of opportunity. Calling Singapore a village comforts the ego. It says, we may be falling apart, but hey, at least we're big. So yes, America has size, Singapore has brains. And when the two collide, the joke is obvious. The so-called village is running a first world economy with third world humility, while the self-proclaimed superpower is stuck fixing potholes with duct tape. So let's entertain the American imagination for a moment. If Singapore really were a village, what kind of village are we talking about? A sleepy countryside hamlet with chickens clucking in the yard, grandmas waving from bamboo huts, and kids splashing in muddy rivers. Cute, right? Except the chickens in Singapore are actually fried at Jollibee. The grandmas are more likely to be scrolling TikTok on fiber optic Wi-Fi, and the muddy rivers have been replaced with Marina Bay Sands, a rooftop infinity pool that makes Vegas look like a kiddie splash park. The irony here is delicious. Americans fly 18 hours, step into Changi Airport, the so-called village bus stop, and are immediately greeted with a butterfly garden, a 5-story indoor waterfall, and biometric immigration gates that make JFK's security line look like a medieval punishment. And yet somehow the word village still comes out of their mouths. Maybe it's the jet lag. Maybe it's denial. Maybe it's just easier to call it a village than admit your airport feels like a Greyhound station with wings. But let's zoom out. Villages don't build 50-story luxury condos faster than you can update your Facebook status. Villages don't host Formula One night races that light up the skyline like a sci-fi movie. Villages don't have GDP per capita higher than most US states. And villages certainly don't quietly transform themselves into global financial hubs while still making sure the public bathrooms smell like eucalyptus. Americans call Singapore a village because it's small. But what they don't realize is that smallness is the very thing that makes Singapore terrifyingly efficient. It's a vertical village, if you like. Every inch engineered, every square meter planned, every law enforced with the kind of precision that makes American freedom look like chaos in disguise. The so-called village has built a skyline that competes with Manhattan, a digital infrastructure that Silicon Valley envies, and a standard of living that most Americans secretly wish they had. So maybe Singapore is a village, just not the kind you're picturing, more like the village in Clash of Clans. Except this one already maxed out its defenses, upgraded its walls, and quietly took your crown while you were still fumbling with the tutorial. Here's where things get personal. I feel and experience that you only truly understand Singapore when you live there long enough to see how it quietly outperforms countries 10 times its size. It's not just about the skyscrapers or the airport selfies. It's about the rhythm of daily life. Take transport. In America, owning a car often feels like owning a second mortgage. Insurance, gas, parking, repairs, and that's before your dashboard lights up with warning signals that no mechanic can agree on. In Singapore, the MRT gets you practically anywhere on time in air-conditioned comfort, with a cleanliness standard that makes New York's subway smell like a cautionary tale. If this is a village, then sign me up. Because the last time I rode the subway in Manhattan, I left with the haunting memory of a rat dragging a pizza slice bigger than its body. Or housing. Americans dream of owning a suburban house with a yard, white picket fence, and a dog. Reality check. In cities like San Francisco or New York, that dream now costs $1 million minimum, and that's for a shoebox with peeling paint. Meanwhile, Singapore's public housing system quietly ensures that the majority of its citizens actually own their homes. Imagine that. A so-called village where the people live better than in the world's richest empire. Even safety tells the story. Walk through certain American neighborhoods after dark, and you'll start rehearsing your last will and testament. Walk through Singapore at 2 a.m., and the only danger is overeating at a 24-hour hawker stall. In a city where you can leave your iPhone on a food court table, go order laksa and come back to find it untouched. The word village feels less like an insult and more like a compliment America could only dream of earning. I feel from experience that Americans call Singapore a village because they don't know what it means to live in a place where the basics, safety, housing, transport, actually work. Singapore's village is modernity with discipline, while America's empire often feels like disorder with good PR. And when you've lived both, the contrast is too sharp to ignore. Here's the thing about America. It loves to brag about being big. Big cars, big houses, big portions, big dreams. But big also means big problems. And I feel, from watching it closely, that America's obsession with size is the reason it can't keep its systems from collapsing like an overcooked pancake. Take infrastructure. Americans like to laugh at Singapore's tiny size, but at least the trains here actually show up. In the US, half the subway systems look like relics from the Industrial Revolution. Escalators don't work, ticket machines swallow your money, and the tracks? Let's just say signal failure is practically a love language in New York. Compare that to Singapore's MRT, spotless platforms, digital countdown timers, and stations so air conditioned you might actually need a sweater. Airports? Don't even get me started. Singapore's Changi is basically Disneyland for adults. Indoor waterfalls, butterfly gardens, and more shopping than Fifth Avenue. Meanwhile, JFK is where happiness goes to die. It's the only place where you can wait 3 hours for a security check and still miss your flight. Americans calling Singapore a village while their airports smell like regret and hot dog water. That's comedy gold. And then there's healthcare. In Singapore, the system may not be perfect, but it's functional, efficient, fast, and surprisingly affordable compared to American standards. In the US, one ambulance ride can cost more than a month's rent in Singapore. Nothing says first world empire like going bankrupt because you sprained your ankle. This is the irony. Americans sneer at Singapore's size, yet their own systems are so bloated, so disorganized, that they can't even guarantee basic reliability. The so-called village has world-class infrastructure, while the self-proclaimed superpower can't stop its bridges from collapsing. Big country, broken systems, small country, working systems. Which one would you rather live in? And maybe that's the hidden truth. America's obsession with size hides a deep insecurity. It's easier to call Singapore a village than to admit that a city the size of a postage stamp is running smoother than the empire that put a man on the moon. Americans often imagine Singapore as sterile. They picture it as a place where chewing gum is outlawed, caning is still on the books, and everyone walks in robotic lines whispering "Yes, sir" to Big Brother. It's the caricature of an over-disciplined village, where the only excitement comes from choosing between rice or noodles. But here's the twist. If you've actually lived in Singapore, you know the culture is not only richer than America's stereotype, it's delicious, literally. I feel, in experience, that nothing destroys the village narrative faster than sitting at a hawker centre at midnight. Picture it. You're sweating a little from the humidity, the plastic chair is wobbling under you, and you're slurping laksa or biting into chicken rice that costs less than a Starbucks latte. Around you are aunties gossiping in Hokkien, uncles yelling across tables in Tamil, Malay teenagers laughing over kopi, and someone switching effortlessly between English and Mandarin mid-sentence. Call that sterile. It's chaos, beautiful, flavorful chaos. Meanwhile, in America, what passes for multicultural dining is a strip mall Panda Express next to a Taco Bell. And sure, you can order your authentic Asian food, but it's been repackaged, sweetened, and deep fried until it tastes like despair. The US celebrates diversity as a slogan. Singapore lives it every day, in every bite, in every language shouted across a food stall. But it's not just food. It's the daily discipline of a society that runs like clockwork. Trash disappears without complaint. Laws are enforced without endless debates. Kids learn 4 languages before breakfast, then go home to parents who still expect piano practice. Some Americans call this rigid. I call it functional, because in a so-called village where rules are followed, the trains run, the streets are safe, and the food is world-class. Tell me again why chaos is supposed to be superior. The funny part? Americans mock Singapore for being boring. Yet every year, thousands of them line up to live in boring. They want the safety, the order, the convenience. They just don't want to admit that the village figured out a formula that the empire can't replicate. So next time someone dismisses Singapore as sterile, I feel from experience that they've probably never eaten char kway teow at 2 a.m. or seen a 12-year-old switch between 3 languages faster than an American can refill their Coke. That's not a village. That's survival of the smartest. Here's the cosmic irony. In the American imagination, being big is always better. Big land, big military, big egos. But history has a habit of humbling giants. Rome fell. The British Empire shrank to an island with good tea. And America, well, let's just say its infrastructure report cards look more like detention slips. Meanwhile, the so-called village of Singapore keeps climbing international rankings like it's speed-running civilization. Think about it. America has 50 states constantly arguing with each other, like a dysfunctional family reunion that never ends. Singapore, one city, one government, one game plan. You may call it small, but small means nimble. While Congress is still yelling about healthcare, Singapore has already rolled out digital IDs, cashless payments, and urban planning that makes Los Angeles look like a pile of Legos scattered on the floor. And let's not forget money. America drowns in debt so massive it could crush a small planet. Singapore? It quietly hoards reserves like a dragon sitting on gold, investing globally while Americans are busy debating whether Wi-Fi should count as a human right. Which one sounds more like a village to you? Here's the kicker. Smallness isn't weakness, it's power. Singapore doesn't need to be a sprawling continent to punch above its weight. It's like comparing a smartphone to a landline. One fits in your pocket but does everything. The other takes up space, drops your calls, and is only good for nostalgia. Americans call Singapore a village because it makes them feel better. But the uncomfortable truth is that the so-called village runs on efficiency, foresight, and brutal discipline. The empire runs on nostalgia, credit cards, and Netflix. And when history finally tallies the score, don't be surprised if the village is still standing while the empire is busy arguing about who forgot to fix the Wi-Fi. So yes, small can outlast big. And in the 21st century, the village might just inherit the earth. So after all this, let's revisit the question. Is Singapore really a village? If by village you mean a place where the trains are spotless, the airports feel like luxury resorts, the streets are safe, the food is divine, and the government actually plans for the future, then yes, please sign me up for village life. Because here's the reality. Americans call Singapore a village not because it's small, but because it's too good for its size. It's easier to laugh at the dot on the map than to admit that the dot might just be doing things better than the empire. Calling Singapore a village is like calling a Ferrari a small car. Technically true, functionally absurd. And I feel from experience that once you've lived in both worlds, the chaos of America's bigness and the order of Singapore's smallness, you stop caring about labels. Big, small village, empire. What matters is whether your system works. And right now, Singapore's system works frighteningly well. So maybe the real question isn't whether Singapore is a village. Maybe it's this. If the so-called village is running cleaner, safer, and smarter than the so-called empire, then what does that say about the empire? And that's where I'll leave it to you. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think America is underestimating Singapore because of its size? Or is Singapore overachieving in a way that makes everyone else uncomfortable? Comment your verdict. Village, empire, or something far more dangerous. The future.